Morning, everyone. We are the members of Group 6. I'm Philippa Griffin.
My name is Chavez McKenzie.
My name is Shay Richard.
My name is Cephas Hepburn.
And I am Jayan Davis.
And we will be discussing the ethical implications of pharmaceutical companies conducting drug trials in the Bahamas. Throughout the presentation, we will be focusing on the ethical challenges of conducting drug trials on vulnerable Bahamian communities, the existing regulatory frameworks that govern the process, and how we can improve the process going forward. We will dive deep into specific scenarios, like the case where an international pharmaceutical company conducts a drug trial in Cockburn Towns in Salvador, exploring the ethical principles that should govern such exercises and how the government and other stakeholders in the health industry can govern such trials while advancing medical research. So, let's look at the critical issue when international pharmaceutical company conducting medical drug trials in the Bahamas that mainly targets low-income families and communities. Our presentation discusses the advantages and the concerns that surround these trials. Some of these trials raise serious ethical questions, mainly around exploitation and access to healthcare services. For effective guidance of these trials, we will turn to the Declaration of Helsinki, which was established in 1964 for standards in medical research involving humans. This declaration addresses some key principles, some of which we will highlight in this presentation. Firstly, informed consent. This principle transparency so participants understand risk and benefits without coercion. Then there is the veracity principle, meaning honesty to the patients, which is vital. This principle ensures that participants are properly informed about the trial's process, risk, and benefits, building trust between the researchers and the community they are serving. Raphael Del Rey et al. Believes that there is a lapse in clinical trial physicians and conductors protecting low and middle income families in studies. There are great concerns of researchers taking advantage of the participants because of their financial conditions and limited access to healthcare or other basic needs. Due to the disposition, participants are likely to accept the risk, receive financial gain, and help for their pre-existing condition because the offer is too good to be true. In any clinical trial, there are always the risk of coercing persons to participate for financial gain, which often clouds their thinking and causes them to act against their better judgment if the offer of financial gain and treatment is withheld. The Declaration of Helsinki details that investors, host country officials, and ethics committees are accountable for ensuring that these trials done in the low-income communities, such as proposed trials in the Bahamas, does not create great risk to the participants based on their present condition and involvement in the study to benefit others. Here we have produced a scenario we want you to take a look at. To give you a clearer picture of the topic we're discussing, let's dive into the scenario we were analyzing. An international pharmaceutical company arrived in Cockburn Town, a small town in San Salvador in the Bahamas. The company was there to conduct a clinical trial for dementia, a condition affecting the elderly. The company held an impromptu meeting at the church where the company's representatives addressed the residents, explaining that they were there looking for participants for a trial. In total, 100 volunteers were identified and randomly divided into two groups. The pro group, which received the experimental dementia drug being tested, and the no group, which received the placebo, a dummy pill that has no active ingredient and poses no serious risk. The two groups were observed closely to compare the effects of the experimental drugs versus the placebo. Edinburgh 2000 argues that at the end of a clinical trial, the participants in the study should be assured that the best diagnostic care and treatment was given to them. Now we'll look at the pros.
Let's explore the pros of conducting ethical drug trials, starting with the first set of benefits. Firstly, ethical drug trials minimize the risk associated with new drugs through preliminary testing. Before drugs reach human beings, they first undergo rigorous testing in lab studies and computer simulations to identify possible issues. Then drugs are made safer after animal research, ensuring the drug does not cause severe harm, reducing the possible side effects, and making the drug more easily absorbed by the human body. Thirdly, effective treatment developed through these trials benefits society greatly, possibly leading to newfound cures for prevailing illnesses. Fourth, high ethical standards ensure that participants are taken care of, offering great quality of care inclusive to frequent medical screenings throughout the trial. Fifth, ethical drug trials ensure families from low-income neighborhoods, like those from Cockburn Town, get access to essential healthcare services that they may not likely be able to afford, like the experimental drug for dementia we have in this case. Continuing with the pros, let us look at other benefits associated with ethical drug trials. These drug trials can provide economic empowerment for low-income communities. In places like Cockburn Town, where the pharmaceutical industry was conducting research, participants can receive financial compensation for their time, bringing temporary resources and jobs to the region, boosting the local economy. Additionally, ethical drug trials advance medical knowledge and save lives. Transparency, emphasized by the Declaration of Helsinki, builds trust with the participants, and continuous communication improves trial outcomes. Keeping the participants informed throughout the process ensures better cooperation and more accurate feedback. Finally, supervised trials ensure ethical compliance. Independent oversight committees are to monitor the trial to make sure it follows ethical guidelines. These pros highlight how ethical drug trials can balance medical advancement with community benefits, making them valuable tools when conducted appropriately. Now let's move on to the cons.
Let's now shift our focus to the cons of drug trials, starting with some serious ethical concerns. First, there is a significant risk of exploitation in these trials. In our case scenario, the international company targets Cockburn Town, which is home to many low-income households who are more prone to accepting contracts for financial gain. There is a risk of coercion that undermines informed consent. People from low-income residences may feel compelled to participate, especially when they are promised financial incentives or healthcare services without properly understanding all the terms of the agreement, causing them to be unable to make fully informed decisions, which makes them more vulnerable to exploitation. Second, the outcome of the drug trial is not certain. Randomized trials, like the one in our case scenario, may not be in the participant's best interest. The pro group, which receives the experimental drug, and the no group, which receives the placebo, are randomly assigned, meaning a participant placed in the no group are not benefited medically at all. Furthermore, if the experimental drug is less effective compared to the existing treatments for dementia, then the trial could possibly do more harm than good. In these cases, clinical equipoise must be considered. According to Samuel and Deborah Hellman in 1991, the idea that there is uncertainty about which treatment is better is flawed and deceptive as it puts the patient's health in jeopardy. Historically, trials have prioritized results over participants. Hellman and Hellman in their 1991 critique argued that during drug trials, researchers may become more focused on research without paying attention to the participants. Participants from impoverished areas are more likely to have a greater amount of underlying conditions or weaker immune systems, which make them more susceptible to disease and drug interactions. Finally, potential harm is not always minimized in a drug trial. Despite the existing guidelines, trials can still expose participants to risks, like drug side effects. Even when strictly followed, the odds can be decreased but not eliminated, as side effects and risks are always possible. These cons emphasize the need for stronger protection to ensure drug trial exercise does not harm vulnerable participants like those from the Bahamas. Now let's think of what our group thinks about this ethical dilemma.
Now that we have explored the pros and cons of drug trials, let's share Group Six's position on how the exercise should be conducted in the Bahamas. First, we believe that ethical drug trials must prioritize participants' well being above everything else. Second, veracity and informed consent are important, where a researcher must be honest with the participants and ensure they understand the purpose of the trial, risks, and benefits through informed consent. Third, the company must practice non malfeasance, which is minimizing harm to participants of the trial. Fourth, we believe that there should be autonomy, where participants can withdraw from this exercise freely without facing pressure or penalties. Finally, beneficence requires the trials to be conducted by qualified professionals. Our position as a group is clear that drug trials must adhere to these ethical principles to protect communities while ensuring medical research. To understand this issue in detail, let's look at a real world example of a drug trial exercise in the Bahamas and see how ethical principles can be applied. Celco Labs Clinical, a company operating in the Bahamas, is currently conducting a stem cell research. The trials focus on treating conditions like cardiovascular disease, which affects the heart and blood vessels, and aging-related issues like musculoskeletal injuries. However, there is a need to ensure the process follows the right legal routes, and in the Bahamas, such a trial requires approval from the Ministry of Health. The ministry ensures that the research aligns with the national health priorities and ethical standards. Additionally, the National Drug Council oversees compliance, acting as an independent body to monitor the trial and ensure it adheres to all guidelines. Finally, fair sampling practices are crucial to ensure that there is no exploitation during the trial process. This example serves as a good testament to how the Bahamian government can balance medical advancement and community protection, applying the ethical principles we have discussed to a real world case scenario. For our rebuttal, let's first address some criticisms of drug trials and then counter them.
First, let's look at the critique by Samuel and Deborah Hellman, who in 1991 argued that drug trials, especially randomized ones, are morally flawed. They argued that randomized trials are not always the best because they don't guarantee that the participants get the most effective treatment. Instead, Hellman and Hellman suggest that a doctor's opinion may be more beneficial to the patient as they make recommend treatment that is tailored to the patient's needs. The two scholars also propose that patient selection is superior to randomization, as selection would allow researchers to get patients who would benefit from experimental drugs, thus ensuring better outcomes. Finally, Hellman and Hellman argue that clinical equipoise, which is the idea that there's genuine uncertainty about which treatment is better, is ethically questionable. They argue this way, claiming that that clinical equipoise can be used to justify trials that are not in the best interest of the patient. This critique challenges the ethics of randomized trials, emphasizing participant care over research goals. Now, let's counter Hellman and Hellman's critique with arguments in favor of ethical drug trials. First, the Declaration of Helsinki, established in 1964, counters the critique by Hellman and Hellman. Helsinki states that ethical drugs should ensure every participant is given the right and the best proven diagnostic method available. Second, ethical trials prioritize participant care as Helsinki requires researchers to put the well being of the participants above everything else. Third, Benjamin Freeman, in his 1999 work, argues that trials are permissible when there is clinical equipoise, which is the state when there is uncertainty about the effective treatment for a particular disease. Fourth, high ethical standards ensure efficiency and safety. The social good, like new treatments, justifies ethical trials, as seen with the smiling patient. This rebuttal shows that ethical frameworks like Helsinki and Friedman's views support trials that balance innovation without protection.
Group 6's stance remains that drug trials are an important factor in medical healthcare, but it also concerns the ethical practices and guidelines that must be adhered to. We believe that drug trials should be held in the Bahamas as it can serve as a benefit to low-income communities, as a source of healthcare and financial help. As long as these trials are appropriately conducted, more good will be done than harm, and can be a great factor in medical advancement and low-income community empowerment. Thank you for listening to our presentation.